Hi, and welcome to part 11 of the PowerShell tutorial series on GUIs or graphical user interfaces. In this episode, we'll be looking at checkboxes. So we're going to be designing an application similar to the application we've been working on lately. So it's just going to be another service inspector. It's going to have the data grid. It's going to have the filter that filters on the text change event. But we're also going to be adding checkboxes to be able to filter whether we want to see the only the running services or only the stopped services or both together, which is why we're using checkboxes, because we might want to be looking for both because we might not know if it's running or stopped. So let's go ahead and let's get started on that. So what we're first going to want to do is we're going to want to open up our Visual Studio, and I'm using Visual Studio 2022 here. So we're just going to want to open this up and we are going to create a new project. So this hasn't really changed since the last time. We are just going to scroll down to where we can get to a WPF application. You can use the C# or the Visual Basic version of this. So we're just going to use the C# WPF application. And we aren't going to change any of the other options here. So we're just going to go ahead and create that project. And now here we are. So we're going to get this to pop up here, which is going to be our graphical user interface window that we're going to be building. Let me just make sure that it looks okay for you guys. So we will just, let me just fix the zoom on this here. We're going to zoom that to perfect. So that should be pretty good. So what we're going to first want to do is we are of course going to want to put in our data grid on this window here. And for the data grid, what I like to do is I just like to size it to pretty much the size of our window. And I'm going to be shrinking our window. So for the height of the window, I'm just going to make it 600. The width of the window, I'm just going to make it 600 as well. So that should be pretty good. Actually, what we'll do for the height, we'll keep it at 450. And we will make the width, we'll actually keep it at 800. What we'll do is we'll put a bunch of controls on the side maybe and do a little filter on the side, or we can do it on this side actually. Let's do it on this side. So we're going to put the data grid on this side of the window. I'm just going to take out the item sources that Visual Studio automatically puts in there. And we're just going to want to make sure that we put the actual width and the actual height. Because if we don't do that, we've noticed that sometimes the controls get a little bit weird once we bring them into PowerShell and we start adding our code to it. So we have our data grid. Now let's go ahead and let's bring in a label here. Now this label, we are strictly just going to put the word filters with a colon in there. And then what we're going to do for that is then we're going to put in a text box here. And in that text box, we are just going to put in filter. There's a text in there. Now I'm not naming any of these controls just yet. We're going to be doing that in just a little bit. So we're going to be just doing that, and we are just going to put in another label here just to kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what that filter is. So we're just going to put name colon in here. And that's going to be just right here, nicely lined up with that text box. And then what we're going to do is we are going to put in 2 checkboxes. The first one we are going to put in as the content. We are just going to put running. And then we're going to put in another checkbox. And the content of that we're going to put as stopped. And let's just arrange these checkboxes just over here. And then what we're going to do is we're also going to display what we find here. So actually, what we might actually be able to do, this seems like a little bit of a large data grid, but I guess it doesn't really hurt. We're just going to keep that the way that it is. And then 800, we're just going to make sure that we hard set our grid as well. Perfect. All right, so now what we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to put another label here at the bottom. And we're just going to put, we're just going to put service name as the content here. And we're just going to put a little colon there. We're just going to drag that here. And then we're just going to drag another label, put it right underneath, and we're not going to change the content of that one just yet. And then we're going to do another label right underneath. And we are just going to put that to the content of that. We're going to put that to status. And then we are going to go ahead and just put another label underneath that. That should be pretty good. Let's get them all lined up there. So that should be pretty good. Now, all we need to do is add our names to the fields to be able to process them in our PowerShell script as we've seen that before. So let's go ahead and let's add a name here. Or actually, I'm just going to name it through this option here on the on the right hand side. So we're just going to put, for the data grid, I'm just going to put DDG underscore services. And then for the text box, we're going to put TXT underscore filter. For the checkbox, we're going to put CHK underscore running for the one that says running. Just make sure that you always have the heights and the widths set up as hard values, because if you don't, some weird things usually happen when you're then opening up the window. It might not look as what you saw in your Visual Studio. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just something that I've kind of noticed that definitely helps. If you leave them to auto, it definitely scales a bit better. But when your window first opens up, it might look kind of weird. Like if you just tell people to adjust the window properly, then it's not going to be an issue. But that also at that point relies on the user to change it. So for this checkbox, we're going to put CHK stopped. And then we don't have to name these labels because we're not going to be changing them, but we will be naming these ones. So this one's going to be label underscore service name. And then the content, we are going to be able to empty it. And then this one, we're going to put LBL underscore status. And we are going to empty that content there. Perfect. So everything should be okay now. We should be able to, at this point, save this. So actually, I'm just going to change the title here of our window. We're going to change it to Service Inspector. All right, so let's go ahead and then let's click on File at the top, and we're going to save our main window.xaml file, and we are going to save that where we want to. So I'm actually going to save it in a folder here, which is, for some reason, I named it 10 checkboxes. It should actually be 11, but we're just going to save that in here. All right, so we have our XAML file created. So then what we need to do is we need to open up our Visual Studio Code. I'm already in the folder that I need to be. So I'm just going to create a PowerShell file here. So it's going to be app.ps1. And then what we're going to do, as we've kind of done with all these videos for GUIs now, we just copy paste that first section here just to bring in that window. And then what we could do is we're just going to do a form1.show dialog, open and close parentheses. So if we just run this here, and it seems that it errored out here. So let's just see if this works. Perfect. So here is our window. So we can see it looks exactly as we've planned. We have our little filter here. We have our checkboxes that work, and we have our data grid. So let's go ahead and let's make some functionality in here. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is set up this data grid to have our columns that we want for our service inspector, which I would say for services, the major names that you really need are going to be your status, your display name, and your service name. Those would be the main ones. You might not necessarily need display name and service name. I like to show both of them. This way you have like the friendly name that is easily readable, and the one that Windows uses to reference it. So let's go ahead and let's create a variable called columns here, and we are going to set that to a empty, well, not an empty array, but an array. And we are going to go ahead and put in our columns that we want. So we're going to put in status, and then display name, and then service name here. And you don't need any commas in here because they're just delimited by the space. So that should be good. And then let's go ahead and let's get our services here. So we're going to create a variable called services, and we're going to do a get service, and we're going to do select object, and we are going to go ahead and reference our columns. So if we just run this here, we can see our services object is what we want. So we have our status, we have our display name, and we have our service name. All right, so what we're going to want to go ahead and do now is pretty much set up this into a data table to be able to put it in a data grid. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called service data table, and we're going to set that to a new object, and we're going to set that to system.data.data table. All right, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to do a service data table dot columns dot add range, and then in here we're going to add our columns. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to add a void in front of this, because this will actually generate a output to the console, which we just don't want to really show to our users. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add all of the services to this service data table. So we're going to do a for each service in services. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a entry here. All right, let me just make sure you guys can still see everything on the screen. Yep, everything looks pretty good. All right, so then what we're going to want to go ahead and do is actually just for each column. So here we're going to be going through all the different values that we want. So in columns, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to do the entry is going to be plus equal to the service dot column. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a service data table dot add dot rows dot add, and we are going to add our entry in here. Right, so if we run all of these lines here and we look at our service data table, we could see that we do have everything. Now what we did notice is in here, every time that it was running, it was actually outputting to the screen. So if we just run this again, we do see that it outputs to the screen automatically. So all we're going to do is a square bracket, and put void inside of it. And then if we run this now, we don't get any output, which is what we want. Now, all we need to do is put this data table, because if we just run this now, we don't actually have the data table inside of our data grid. So that is the next step that we need to do. So let's go ahead and let's reference our data grid, which is just going to be the $var DDG underscore services. And then we're going to put the item source. Now, what I usually like to do, which is going to make this a little bit easier for us, is let's just go ahead and let's run this whole beginning portion here. And in here we should have, yeah, perfect. So let's go item source. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a service dot data table, and we're going to set it to the default view. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that we set our read only on our data grid is going to be set to true. And then let's go ahead and so now if we run this, we get all of our data grid. Now the only thing is it kind of looks a little bit weird because we have all these lines. So we want to just remove these lines so it looks a little bit nicer. So the way that you could do that is you're going to do the var underscore DDG underscore services dot, and then it should be grid lines visibility. And then we're going to set that equal to none. And if we run this now, we get no lines and it just looks very, very neat. But we still don't have our filters working at all, and we don't have our selection working yet either. So what we want to first do is let's get our selection working. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to do a var underscore DDG underscore services and then a dot add underscore selection change. Now we've seen this whole part of the application in a previous video, but since it's been a little while, I'm just redoing it for you guys. So here we have the add selection changed, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do a var label underscore service name, and then we're going to be setting the content to that as the var DDG services dot selected item dot display name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a var lbl status dot content equals var DGG services dot selected item dot status. All right, so now if we run this here, we can see that when we select, we actually get all of our options here. But as we can see, I kind of messed up because I made the labels the same size that they were when they just said label here. So it actually chops it off. So what we're going to do is we are just going to go ahead and come back in here. And let me just seems to have some issues. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and close this solution here. So to ever open up another project, all you really need to do is you can open up a previous project. Now we're going to see that our XAML file is not here. All you really need to do is right click on the right here and then do a add existing item. Oh, actually, before we add the existing item, we do need to delete the main window XAML that comes with it. We're going to add existing item, and we're going to come into our folder where we have our XAML file. And just open up that XAML file here, and let's go ahead and let's click on the label, and we're going to put the height, we're going to keep it the same, but the width, we are going to go ahead and set that to auto, because we don't really know how big we actually need it to be. So that should be okay. And then we're just going to save our main window XAML. And we are just going to go ahead and overwrite our file here. And if we go ahead and run this now, as you can see, we did fix that. Now there are some long service names that might cause an issue. You can definitely always adjust the window as is to fix that. So if we just go ahead and do this, let's change that to auto, and then in this label here, so let's just go and let's add some width to this. So we're just going to put this width now to, let's put it to 900, and then the width here to 900. And let's go ahead and space that out a little bit more. So now let's do our save XAML as. All right. Just close this window and let's go ahead and let's see. So this one already looks a lot better. It looks a little bit weird, so I would probably put them on the top, but this is definitely something that you can play around with. So as you can see, everything is working except for our status now. So let's just make sure that we still have our status here. Width. Oh, our width was, I accidentally had set it, removed it from auto here. So let me just save that once again. And let's run this. So there we are. So we can see that our selection changed is working. So now let's go ahead and let's apply these filters. So what we need to do is, because we know we want our filter to get applied when we change the text in here, but also when we check or uncheck these boxes. So we're going to have a lot of event triggers for the same filter. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function here, and we're going to call it filter services. And let's go ahead and let's do an open and close curly bracket. And then in here, we are going to start with a if statement. So we're going to do an if $, var checked running, and then we're going to do a dot is checked. Then we're going to do a dash and we're going to do a var if the var underscore check stopped is checked. So if both of these are checked, we are going to go ahead and do a filter is going to equal to, and this is going to be display name like, and then in here we are going to do a single quote, and then we're going to put our variable, which is going to be our var underscore text underscore filter dot text and status in, and then we're going to do open and close parentheses, and then in here we're going to do running and all right, and we're going to have a else if, and then our condition for here is going to be if var underscore check underscore running dot is checked. So if the running is checked, but the stopped is unchecked, what we're just going to do is we're going to copy paste this filter, and we are just going to remove the stopped. We're going to copy paste this else if. We're going to change this running to stopped, and we're going to change this running to stopped. Now, what we're going to want to do is we are just going to do a else. So if none of them are checked, what we want to make sure that we do is we want to make sure that we have a filter that if the status is in nothing, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and do service data table dot default view dot filter equals filter. All right, now of course this function is a function, but we have nothing calling it. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So we're going to do a var underscore text underscore filter dot add underscore text changed. So this is going to add a text changed event. So we're going to do an open and close parentheses, open and close curly bracket. And in here, we're going to do filter services. So if we just run this as it is now, we are going to see that if we type in, we get nothing. None of them are checked. So if we recheck running, okay, so let's just make sure that everything is okay. That should be like we're just going to want to make sure that we put these wildcards here actually, because that's going to greatly change because we just want to be able to filter. So let's put an A and then an A. So as we can see, we don't get the changes as we check these boxes because we don't have events on them yet. So let's go ahead and let's add the events, and then all we're going to do is we're just going to shrink this down to one line. So then to add the events to the checkboxes, we're going to do our check running, and then we're going to do a add underscore checked, and we're going to do filter services, and let's do the same for the stopped checkbox. And then if we run this here, now let's do looking for the print spooler. Is it running? It is running. Okay, perfect. But as you can see, I'm not getting any changes if I uncheck. So if I have both of these checked and I want to remove the stopped ones, I can't just uncheck it. That's because the checked event actually doesn't check if it's unchecked. There's a separate event for that. So we're actually going to copy paste these two lines again. because all it is going to be add unchecked and then add unchecked. And then if we run this here now, we can do our print and we can check both of these, and then we just want the running, so that works. And we can still click on our event and that works. Now, let's say you didn't want the functionality to where if both of them are unchecked, it just doesn't check for anything. The only thing you really have to remove here is this last else statement. And then if we run this, we can see that if none of them are checked, it searches for both running and stopped. And if we do running and stopped, it just does that. But we also don't get our filter for the display name. So what we would want to do is we would just want to make sure that we have just this. And then we can do that in there. And then we could do print. And we could easily see all the statuses. If none of them are checked, it's instantly going to check for both. But if you only have one checked, it will only check for the checked events. Now, this would be almost more like having radio buttons almost. If you had all stopped and running, and then none of them checked would be all. And as soon as you have one of them checked, it only checks for that one. If you have both, it will check for both as well. So that is basically the basics of checkboxes. Now, you can use checkboxes in filtering options like this, or to add options in case of some different applications, like if you're making applications for permissions, let's say, or making a application to create Active Directory accounts, because there are checkboxes in Active Directory. You could put some checkboxes in here to activate those, like change password on next logon. You could make that a checkbox, or the password never expires. You can make that as a checkbox. You can even trigger new controls to appear if a checkbox gets checked. So all those are different options that you can do. But basically, the main key takeaway here are really going to be these checked events. Once you know how to add that in there, you will be able to use checkboxes in your applications that you build with PowerShell and the Visual Studio WPF window editor. So hope you guys liked the video. If you guys have any comments or questions, leave them down below and hit that like and subscribe button and that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.